everyone. My name is Nobel Suhendra, a grade 11 student at GIS, and today I'll be presenting on 100% renewable energy in Indonesia, as well as the Nusantara supergrid. Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago nation, hosting 220 million occupants. It is composed of thousands of islands, each with their own little microgrids. When the government announced plans to construct a supergrid, the scientific community went into a frenzy. Could this really be the solution to Indonesia's long-standing struggle with accessible electricity? Could this really be the time for the 50 million Indonesians still living in the dark to finally find and experience the comforts of the modern world? These were questions that many people asked, but few looked to answer. Such an announcement came around the same time that discussions were held regarding Indonesia's plan to utilize 100% renewable energy by 2060. This meant discarding the usage of any fossil fuels and replacing them with solar photovoltaic, hydropower, or geothermal generation methods. The real question then became apparent. Could a supergrid truly be beneficial towards Indonesia's plan of achieving green energy in Indonesia? Of course, in order to be able to answer this question, we'll have to compare the most optimal configurations of Indonesia's electrical network with and without a supergrid. But how exactly will we be able to find the most optimal configurations? After all, there are far too many factors to consider. Aside from the fluctuations in the electricity demand and supply due to weather, the added cost due to power transmission loss, as well as the environmental sustainability of various generation methods, all culminate into a colossal hurdle for mathematicians to overcome. Should this obstacle be thawed, large-scale electrical networks could be reworked for maximum efficiency, extending the reach of the modern world to the most isolated and poverty-stricken regions. Out of all the possible methodologies of exploring this problem, one particular mathematics concept comes to mind. Optimization, in simple terms, is the selection of the most ideal set of choices in order to best achieve an objective, given the limitations are put into place. One such type of optimization technique is something that we call mixed integer linear programming, or MILP for short. In mathematical terms, MILP involves minimizing or maximizing an objective function, while still maintaining the limitations that are put onto its integer decision variables. A simple example of this would be trying to maximize the area of a rectangle with a fixed perimeter, where the area is equal to the height times the width, and the only constraint is that the perimeter must be maintained and that the height and the width must both be positive real numbers. But there's a reason why such a representation is only a simplification. Optimization problems tend to include a larger number of decision variables as well as more complex constraints, which makes it a flexible solution in a vast array of issues, one of which still happens to be the Nusantara supergrid. So in order to be able to solve this issue, we would have to be able to create an optimization model on a micro scale. In this case, we're trying to minimize the levelized cost of electricity, which is just a common metric that is used in order to determine the long-run cost of particular electrical infrastructure. Here's some of the equations. There are also some assumptions that we'll have to make in order for this model to work. For instance, we'll have to assume that the electricity demand will be 10 megawatt hour per capita per year, while the real discount rate will be about 5%. This is done based on comparisons of other countries whose current levels of economic development match up to those predicted for Indonesia in the next 3 decades. Furthermore, we're also trying to achieve 100% renewable energy, meaning that any fossil fuel power plants will be discarded and replaced with geothermal or hydropower generation facilities. It's also important to note that research has shown that solar photovoltaic farms are likely to be the cheapest source of electricity in the future, meaning that it's fair to justify that solar PV farms will likely be the most popular option as well. As for storage, the government is likely to invest in something we call off-river hydropump storage. Off-river hydropump storage is extremely popular because of its low cost and high reliability. And finally, we'll also be using high voltage alternating current power transmission lines over high voltage direct current lines in islands. Meanwhile, between islands, we'll be using the HVDC cables. While it is true that HVAC does have a higher power transmission loss of about 8% compared to the 5% experienced by HVDC converter stations are extremely expensive, meaning that it's economically unviable. Aside from this, I also analyzed the weather data from the past decade. using factors such as the rain, visibility, cloud, and sun in order to determine and predict the electricity demand and supply so that you could minimize the capacities required. There are some limitations to this model though. For instance, we're assuming that the storage will be always built within close proximity to the solar PV farms. While this does reduce the complexity of the problem, it also understates the possibility of these facilities being built in different locations. Furthermore, this may not exactly be the most optimal configuration just because we're assuming that there's not going to be the use of any shared power transmission lines, which would overstate the levelized cost of electricity. And finally, we're assuming that there's no multi-source provision of electricity to a single particular household. However, these are all problems that are solvable with time, and they're solvable with a concept we call flow networks. But if I got into it, it'll take us the whole day, so I won't. Furthermore, we can also consider the usage of something we call synthetic hydrogen, which will provide an alternative fuel source when weather conditions are poor. Here's some code, more code, more code, more code, more code, and finally more code. So where exactly does Indonesia stand in all this? Well, according to the model, as well as other early research reports, it seems that it's likely that Indonesia is going down the wrong path by pursuing this supergrid. It may not be as viable as we expected because the levelized cost of electricity is actually higher when using a supergrid. The model has also revealed that a likely reason for this is because of the HVDC submarine cables becoming more expensive in deeper areas of the Indonesian seas. As you can see in this topography map of Indonesia, the East Seas, which are darker, are a lot deeper compared to the West Seas, which does increase the cost significantly and overall result in a higher levelized cost of electricity. It's under these circumstances that we cannot question the value of optimization. Its reach extends beyond just infrastructure planning, but it can be applied in many other fields of innovation as well. Thank you.